So we're holding the Ezra Hashem Siman Mem Vav in haGuela. And the Rebbe is talking about the Zionist claim that the 6-day war was a necessary war. The lashon he uses when he describes their claim, he says in Mem Daled, the Shamati Oimrim Shapirsimu Shal Milchama Hazois Haisa Hechrechis V'chiyuvis Al Pitoyer, that people said that this war was necessary and obligatory according to the Torah. So we're going to see what that means in a minute, what the Zionist claim was and what he responds to it. So the cost of our Noida B'Yehuda, Rebbe brings down from the Shalos Shuvas Noida B'Yehuda, Ma'adur Tinyana Chelik Evan Hoezer Siman Kuf Tes.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Ma'adur Tinyana. The second volume of Noida B'Yehuda is called Ma'adur Tinyana. Le'inyan Yafas Toyar. He's talking about the halacha of the woman captured in war. That there's a din, Parshas Kiseitze, that if you go out to war and you capture a woman, you can force her to, you can't force her, but you can bring her to your house and give her the choice to be Megayer, and if she doesn't want to, you have to set her free. But anyway, Yafas Toyar is a halacha that applies in the Milchama. So he says, the loimash kachas la hai dina liachar churban. This din doesn't apply after the churban of the Beis Hamikdash. The ein din zeh noeg el b'shas milchama, because the concept of Yafas Toyar cannot apply except during the war. V'harei ein moitziim lemilchemes harashus ela al pi bezdin shel ayin aleph. We don't make Jews fight a war of reshus, a permitted war, unless there's a bezdin of 71 Sanhedrin that gives permission. Ukvarnis batla bezdin shel ayin aleph, but the bezdin doesn't exist today. B'mei atanoim, already in the time of the Tanoim, the Sanhedrin went into Galus. V'oid, right, by the Churban Beis Mikdash. V'oid shel achar hachurban ein lanu melech v'loy chalutzei tzava. After the Churban, we don't have a king, and we don't have army, we don't have soldiers. Sheyeh shaykh kibush milchama, that there should be such a concept as kibush milchama. Ad kan lashon Noida B'Yehuda. So let's just see inside, because it's interesting. How does this come into Noida B'Yehuda? Why is he even talking about this? Noida B'Yehuda is a sefer written in Europe 250 years ago. Why is he talking about Yafas Toyar? So take a look. It's kind of hard to find this because it's way far into this long tshuva that he writes about some kind of situation with a get, and he says like this. He says, "V'hinei ein meister behema noig el koydem achor korban habayis." I'm in the paragraph starting v'hinei. Oh, I didn't make the lines on yours. Sorry. He says there's two mitzvahs that are machloikis Abaye and Rava and Temura, and one of them is Yafas Toyar, and one of them is Meister Behema. So he says, "Ein Meister Behema noig el koydem korban habayis." There's no Meister Behema except no Meister Behema today after the Churban. Aval yachar Churban gazu shaloi la'aser. That it's true today we could take Meister Behema, but they made a gzeir not to do it. K'mefurish b'choris nun gimel amid aleph by Masech Shabbos daf nun daled amid beis b'tois v'stim rastel have a Meister. V'loy mash kachas Meister Behema liachar Churban habayis ki'in be'avaryan. The only way you can have Meister Behema is with a sinner, meaning someone who didn't listen to the Chachamim. She'avar al divrei Chachamim ve'ister, and he did take Meister. V'zeh lo shchiach, that's not very common. V'gam Yafas Toyar, the captured woman, lo mashkachas la ela b'shas milchama. V'harei l'milchemes reshus ein moitzin ela al pi bezdin shel shivim yechad. You can't have a milchemes reshus without the bezdin of 71. K'mefurish b'mishnah reish Sanhedrin. The first Amud in Sanhedrin it says this. Ukvarnis batla bezdin shel ayin aleph b'nei atanoim. V'oid shel achar churban ein lanu melech v'loy chalutzei tzava. We don't have a king, we don't have an army. Sheyeh shaykh kibush milchama lahatir Yafas Toyar. And so this is what he says. So let's go back to the sefer now. Mevurah midvar, we see from the words of Noida B'Yehuda, beferish explicitly, she'ein makam lemilchamos v'kibush bizman hazeh. There is no war, there is no conquest in our times. Al pi das Torah Kedosha. V'chein nira mikol divrei harishonim v'apoiskim. All the Rishonim and Poiskim hold there's no war bizman hazeh. Lo yeis he'asef poy. It's not the time to write them all down here. He says it doesn't apply to our subject. Why? Because even if there would be a war of Mlchמת Reshus Bizman Hazeh, he says in this case we would never do it. He says Ki be'emes kol mi sheroya hishtalshlu sonyanim. If you look at the history of the 6-Day War, Yira b'chush, he'll see with his own eyes. Ubilti efshar she's topic. There's undoubted that shaloi haisa hamilchama hechrechis klal, that the war was not necessary at all. Anybody who has any logic in his brain, and he's not taking bribes, he's not leaning towards Zionism, he'll see the truth as it is. So, just wanted to point out, so that obviously the Zionists, when they argued that it was a Milchama Hechrechis, they were arguing not. There's two types of war. You got to see this Rambam. Here, I brought the Rambam here. Perkei Hilchos Malachim, Halacha Aleph and Beis. Rambam says, "Ein HaMelech Nilcham Tchila Ela Milchemes Mitzvah." There's two types of war. There's Milchemes Mitzvah and Milchemes Reshus. So Milchemes Mitzvah, the king's allowed to fight on his own, without any Sanhedrin. What is a war of a mitzvah? It's the war of the 7 nations. Fighting Amalek. The Ezras Yisrael miyad tsar shabo aleim, and saving Jewish lives from an enemy that's coming upon them. V'achar kach nilcham bil milchemes reshus. And then, if the king finishes this, then you could go to Mlchמת Reshus. The Ram not just saying that you have to ask Sanhedrin. He's also saying you first have to take care of this before you take care of that. V'hi ha-milchama, what's the Mlchמת Reshus? V'hi ha-milchama shenilcha im shar ha'amim k'dei laharchiv gvul Yisrael. It's when you have a war that the king initiates with another nation in order to widen the borders of the Jewish country, and to increase his fame in the world. Okay, halacha base. Milchemes mitzvah. If the king's going to fight a milchemes mitzvah, he doesn't have to ask permission from the bezdin. He's allowed to go out at any time. And you can force the people to go out. But a voluntary war, he has to ask permission from the Sanhedrin. So, if the Zionists would have argued that their war was a Milchemes Mitzvah, then they could have gotten around this whole point here, right? Because the Noda B'Yehuda is only talking about Milchemes Reshus. Milchemes Mitzvah maybe applies today. You don't have to have a Sanhedrin for it, right? So maybe they would have gotten around this Noda B'Yehuda. The only thing, so the Rebbe didn't, obviously they weren't arguing that. Even the Zionists weren't arguing that the war was a Milchemes Mitzvah, yeah?
Does Noda B'Yehuda talk about the idea in Europe of creating a self-defense against the Cossack-like pogroms?
Oh, so we're going to get to that. That's a separate issue. Self-defense and Gauls. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in this simon over here. Okay.
Have a Warsaw Ghetto. You find out what the Satmar rebbe and others say about the Warsaw.
Yeah, I don't have a Beferisha place where he talked about it, but we when we were doing Man and Chacham, remember that?
Right.
We talked about that.
Right.
That there's a lot of reasons why it was probably there's Yesh Lahatir, you know.
It was mutter?
Well, I'm not
because
saying
in that article in Jerusalem Quarterly, which I told you about, which is cited in Mark Shapiro's book, The Haredim and the Holocaust by Friedman, it's like from 1991. I think he mentioned that Tachoma was against the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Tachoma said it caused the Nazis to destroy them.
Okay, well that's a practical consideration. It means that even if it was mutter, doesn't mean it's the most smart thing to do. You're right. They retaliated afterwards. They killed more Jews because of that.
No rabbis discussed the issue whether it was mutter also.
Yeah, I don't know. They say Rabbi Nachum Zemba supported it, right?
But in this article in Jerusalem Quarterly, which you should look at, it says that the Hachoma said it was bad.
Right. Yeah, I know. There was discussion about it. It's true. I don't know. I mean,
so any rabbi said it was born?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have the
such a relevant topic.
Yeah.
Why isn't everybody talking about it?
It's a good question. I know.
Relevant.
Yeah.
Anyway, so here's the thing, though. Let's say the Zionists would have claimed that it was a Mלחמת mitzvah. They would have claimed that. Obviously, they weren't claiming that. They weren't claiming that Nasser and whatever in the army with Syria, they were going to come and kill every Jew. No, the Zionists didn't even say that. They said it was a milchama that was necessary because of the, to show that you're strong, not back down. When he closed off the Straits of Tehran, shouldn't just back down and be weak. No, we got to show the Jewish state is very strong. But it wasn't a danger. Nobody claimed that it was a danger. If they would have claimed that, then there's another place that we could look, and that is this Rambam that I brought here from the Shirashim. The Rambam the Shirashim, in the beginning of in the Sefer HaMitzvah Shoresh Yud Daled, he says at the end there.
What does Shirashim mean?
The Shirashim is like the principles, the root principles of all the counting mitzvahs. So in the Rambam's Minyan mitzvahs, he counts all Taryag mitzvahs, but he says in his Sefer Mishnah Torah, he's not going to speak out, or in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, he speaks out whether the mitzvah is Nogea Bizman Hazeh, right? But he doesn't speak out if the mitzvah is obviously not Nogea Bizman Hazeh. So he says, if I mention any mitzvahs that don't apply outside of Eretz Yisrael, or they don't apply unless it's in front of the Beis Hamikdash, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, whether they're positive or negative, I will speak out and say, I'll speak out and say it. He says, but I know, everybody knows that the karbanos are not brought except with the Beis Hamikdash. You can't do avodah, you can't bring karbanos any place outside of the Azara. There's no capital punishment today. So he says these things are obvious things. I'm not going to have to speak that out. Then he says, prophecy and kingship, we don't have them. Until we do tshuva, and Hashem will have mercy as He promised, and He'll turn them to us. Okay, here's the key words. Wars, and conquering land, lo yiyeh el b'melech, cannot be done without a king. Uva'atzah Sanhedrin Gedolah, and you have to have the permission of the Sanhedrin, the Kohen Gadol, and you have to have a Kohen Gadol. K'moishe Omar v'lifnei Elazar HaKohen Yamoid, that the king has to stand in front of the Kohen Gadol. And because this is very obvious, most people know it already. Any positive or negative mitzvah that has to do with karbanos, or service in the Beis Hamikdash, or capital punishment, Sanhedrin, and here's the key words: even the Mלחמת mitzvah, and for sure Mלחמת Rishus is lo yetz tarich loymar shoymar ba v'zoy ein anu chayavim ba el bifnei abayis. I don't have to speak out that doesn't apply today. Kizem mevura mimasher zacharnu. That's obvious. That's already included in what we just said. Okay, so
this
is the Frankel Rambam. The new edition of the Rambam that was out in the last 25 years. The old Rambam, by the way, doesn't have these words. The old Rambam is, they say the Frankel Rambam is more exact about the Girsa, so they have this Girsa. Anyway, so if you need to answer someone who says that some Zionist war is a Mלחמת mitzvah, go to this. But that's obviously not what the Rebbe was being told. He was being told, people say it's a Mלחמת hachrechis, it's a necessary war. Necessary, not a Mלחמת mitzvah to save lives. They weren't trying to save lives.
The Bav Rebbe, I think it says it was a Mלחמת mitzvah.
The what?
Bav Rebbe.
Bav Rebbe said it, yeah. I think he used the Shulchan Aruch Simon Shin Kaf Tes. That's what we saw. The Bav Rebbe quoted Shin Kaf Tes, and that's what we're going to see when we do Mem Zayin. But anyway, I brought some interesting history here from Alan Hart.
From where?
Alan Hart's book.
Oh, the realigning of the Jews? Zionism, the realigning of the Jews?
Yeah. So this is page 816. We'll start with this one. He says,
You have it?
I have it, yeah. So
Aaron Cohen gives that scum on.
yeah, I think so. So Alan Hart's not Jewish, so he says, if the statement that the Arabs were not intending to attack Israel and that the existence of the Jewish state was not in danger was only that of a goy, it could be dismissed by Zionists as anti-Semitic conjecture. In fact, the truth of it was admitted by some of the key Israeli players, after the war, of course. Before we look at what actually happened in 1967 and why, here's a short summary of some pertinent post-war Israeli confessions. An interview published in Le Monde on 28 February 1968, Israeli Chief of Staff Rabin said this, quote, I do not believe that Nasser wanted war. The 2 divisions which he sent into Sinai on 14th of May would not have been enough to unleash an offensive against Israel. He knew it and we knew it. That's Rabin admitting that there was no need
And
for a war.
Peled.
It's going to be quoted down here, yeah. On April 14, 1971, a report in the Israeli newspaper Al HaMishmar contained the following statement by Mordechai Ben Tov, a member of the wartime national government. Quote, the entire story of the danger of extermination was invented in every detail and exaggerated a posteriori to justify the annexation of new Arab territory. So that's a strong statement. He's saying that the whole reason for the war was just to get the West Bank, basically. Now, of course, the Israelis will tell you we didn't want to have war with Jordan. We sent messages to Jordan that they shouldn't involve themselves, but they did, But on April 4th, 1972, General Chaim Bar-Lev, Rabin's predecessor as chief of staff, was quoted in Ma'ariv as follows. Quote, we were not threatened with genocide on the eve of the Six-Day War, and we had never thought of such a possibility. In the same Israeli newspaper on the same day, General Ezer Weitzman, chief of operations during the war and nephew of Chaim Weitzman, was quoted as saying, quote, there was never any danger of annihilation. This hypothesis has never been considered as in any serious meeting. In the spring of 1972, General Matityahu Peled, chief of logistic command during the war and one of the 12 members of Israel's general staff, addressed a political literary club in Tel Aviv. He said, quote, the thesis according to which the danger of genocide hung over us in June 1967 and according to which Israel was fighting for her very physical survival was nothing but a bluff, which was born and bred after the war.
His son is an anti-war.
Yeah, Miko Peled, Peled's father.
You met him?
Never met him, I think I spoke to him. In a radio debate, Peled said, Israel was never in real danger, and there was no evidence that Egypt had any intention of attacking Israel. He added that Israeli intelligence knew that Egypt was not prepared for war. In the same program, Chaim Herzog, former DMI, Director of Military Intelligence, future Israeli ambassador to the UN, president of his state, said, there was no danger of annihilation. Neither Israeli headquarters nor the Pentagon, as the memoirs of President Johnson proved, believed in this danger. Then on June 3rd, 1972, Peled was even more explicit in an article of his own for Le Monde. He wrote, all those stories about the huge danger we were facing because of our small territorial size, an argument expounded once the war was over, have never been considered in our calculations. While we proceeded towards the full mobilization of our forces, no person in his right mind could believe that all this force was necessary to our defense against the Egyptian threat. This force was to crush once and for all the Egyptians at the military level and their Soviet masters at the political level. To pretend that the Egyptian forces concentrated on our borders were capable of threatening Israel's existence does not only insult the intelligence of any person capable of analyzing this kind of situation, but is primarily an insult to the Israeli army. So that's all the quotes for now. So,
and I would also like to add, Egypt was busy in the Yemeni civil war.
Oh, so they didn't have the divisions to dedicate to this.
Yeah, they were busy in Yemen. They were preoccupied in the Yemeni civil war.
So basically, the Israelis knew they weren't in danger. This was not a Milchemes mitzvah according to anybody. The Havamina was, maybe it's a Milchama Hechrechis just to show force or to crush the Egyptians, like Peled said. But of course, the Rebbe says that's also not true because it wasn't necessary at all. Okay, Amna. Afilu mishahu meshucha b'tzionis. Even someone who's under influence of a bribe of Zionism, the karuch acharel, and he's very into it, v'iyav shalachavim b'daito eloemes, and he can't understand the truth, so he thinks it's a real war and it's necessary. But I have another argument for you, says the Rebbe. Even if you believe that, nobody could disagree that when you decide to launch a war, you have to think very hard about it, and seriously. You have to have a Torah mind. Because you're actually paskening on human life. You're deciding to send, Jewish soldiers into battle to die. So you have to think very hard to do it or not to do it. To stop, to hold back from doing it. And now, next day Anan, let's take a look. Who made the decision to go to war? On whom are we relying in putting all these Jewish lives on the line? We're not relying on Poskim Gedolei Ador, right? Who are we relying on? Moshe Dayan, right? Eshkol, Rabin, all these guys. Ben Gurion wasn't in the government, but he's behind the scenes. He was pushing for the war. Eshkol didn't want a war, and Ben Gurion wanted, but his party got voted out, so he went into the minority, and then because of that, he was sidelined in the years leading up to the war.
His party got voted out?
Yeah.
But it was still the left and...
His party didn't get voted out, but his ideas in the party were voted out. Meaning, what was it called? Labor. It used to be called something else. Mapai, right. So Mapai didn't officially take the stance to want a war. Ben Gurion and his party, which had Dayan in it, wanted a war. They separated off, made their own party. But right on the eve of the war, since people were upset with Eshkol not making a decision, they brought Dayan into the government. They made a unity government and brought him in. Anyway, so these are the people...
The day before the war?
Basically, like 3 or 4 days before. So, the Eichi talking. So the Rebbe says, how could it be possible? Lachshav, how could you even think Shetehei das Torah seinu akdoisha maskemes, that our Torah should agree Shetinastein v'timaster hachrazu, that this decision should be given into the hands of biyad hakoifrim umufkarim, people who have no belief in Hashem, people who are mufkar, they don't care about anybody. Moshlei umanhigei Medina, they're the leaders of the state, zionists. Shekal beineim damim shel Yisrael, that in their eyes, Jewish blood is very cheap. Umenusim uregilim b'chach, and they're actually very experienced with this. They have a long history of sacrificing Jewish lives. Lahafkir v'lishpat damim shel Yisrael, to be mafkir Jewish blood. V'aldas kain nichnesu l'milchama, and that's why they entered the war. Afshi yadim meroish, they knew already sheyigroim leibud chaye alafim nefashos Israel, that it would cause the lives of thousands of Jews to be lost. Umufkarim heim kol kach, and they're so irresponsible. Ad shemuchanim lahaskim afilu la'avado ein chelik gadol miYisrael chas v'shalom. They're ready to agree even to a large percentage of Jews being killed. Meaning, if the war starts and if it doesn't go correctly, they didn't have to start the war at all. They could have just sat peacefully at home. But if they start a war and something goes wrong, there could be Egyptian bombings. There could be a lot of people killed. V'hichnisu es kol Yisrael l'sakana atzuma. They brought all the Jewish people into a big danger. V'akol kadei levatzeya mizimasam. It was all just to carry out their wishes, the kiyum memshaltam, just to continue having their government, and to continue with their state, hamoredes b'malchus shemayim, which rebels against Hashem. V'yiduim ma'aseim hamufkarim mikvar. We know already the past history of Zionists and the irresponsible things they did. U'miktas mima'aseim hamuchuarim. Some of their wicked deeds are in Isparer. It was already publicized. Lifnei HaMishpat, Le'enei Kol Ha'olam, by the Kastner trial in front of the world. Umehem asher nitfas b'sefer mina meitzar. Some of the evidence about the Zionist conduct during the war was printed in the Sefer Mina Meitzar, which is the Rabbi Gaon or Michal Doiv Zatzal, Weissmandel. That he was the rescue activist who tried to save Jews and
from Nietzsche.
Yeah, and they didn't want to supply him with any money. They said, we don't care about saving the Jews. We want to have a state.
This book is amazing.
Mina Meitzar.
He's Grunbaum.
Yeah, Grunbaum, right. One cow in Palestine is worth more than all the...
And his son, was a notorious capo,
Who? His son, yeah. It's in Holocaust Victims Accused. It says that.
And he was killed in 1948.
His son.
He was actually arrested by the French. He was arrested by the French. He was supposed to be sentenced to death for killing Jews, but the Zionists had connections. Yeah.
Wow.
And he was so bad. Even the haGuela didn't want to accept him in, but he had connections. His father was friends with Ben Gurion, so he allowed him in. Eliezer.
Wow. The imams killed Jews during the war?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Because not all capos killed. Some of them just enforced the rules.
No, he killed Jews. Mm-hmm. And the French arrested him.
Right.
So they're going to execute him.
He got paid each head.
Wow.
I think he also killed Gaim too.
There's no greater sin in the world. More than this, the haskim, to agree, to let a decision relating to the Jewish lives of the whole Jewish people be entrusted to people like this. Most people are mistaken about this, and they don't pay attention. They don't pay attention to the history behind the Zionists. He says, most people don't know, but how could the how could the Zionist followers who are religious Zionists, how could they not be embarrassed to be so arrogant, so chutzpahdik, to lie about something that's so obvious, that's so easy to discover, and to say that this war in '67 was a like the Das Torah agreed that this war should take place. Everybody knows that all the Zionist actions are actually to go against the Torah, lahachis. And definitely when it comes to helping their state, they put Jewish interest on the side and they do whatever is good for their state. And even before the state, as soon as this idea of Zionism arose, that was the Zionist practice.
Was Kessel?
Kessel is foolish. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. This is their foolish path. To go and provoke the nations of the world. And this is what they go down with, this is what they go up with. This is their conversations every day. How do we provoke the nations more and more? That it's known that when Hitler came to power in 1933, the Zionists brought Jews into danger. What did they do? They announced war against Germany in the name of the whole Jewish people. Judea declares, what's the headline? Judea
declares war on Germany.
War on Germany, right.
It's from the Daily Express.
And then the heart of all Jews became melted like water because they were scared of what might result from that declaration. This wouldn't provide any saving for any Jews. It would cause them to be in danger because many Jews, millions of Jews, were under German rule. Even the countries that he didn't control at that point, but he was threatening them. So basically all of European Jewry was endangered. And with this dangerous step of declaring boycott against Germany, they made him even more angry against the Jewish people. So Hitler answered back and he said, he says, I accept your warning. Now I'm going to fight back against the whole Jewish people.
Rebbe Weissman, I think, said he banged his head against the wall and he said, I'm gonna...
You're right, yeah. The carpet or something, right? Fell on the floor with fury. And this is what happened, unfortunately. After that point, after they declared boycott, the Germans boycotted back the Jews, I think. That was the first step.
That's right.
And eventually they outlawed all Jews from certain positions, and they took away all their parnasa, and then they eventually, we know what happened. Until it led to the terrible destruction.
They also outlawed intermarriage, but isn't that good?
Yeah, but it was a sign. Rebbe Miller said it was a sign from Shemayim, the Nuremberg laws, because some of the laws had to do with what the Jews did wrong. You see, every Jew has to have a Jewish name. They have to add Israel to their name. Every Jewish woman has to add Sarah to her name. Right? No intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews. No relations between Jews and non-Jews. Yeah. Anyway, the whole history of Zionism, from the time the movement began, it's one long chain, shall have karas dam Yisrael, of sacrificing Jewish lives for their cause. Gam yadua l'shimtza heitev, and we know very well that the unfortunate event, masha asu habiryonim hamufkarim alalu, what these militants did, kasher hitbiu aniya im pleite b'nei Yisrael, when they sunk a ship full of Jewish refugees, b'choifei Eretz Yisrael, on the coasts of Eretz Yisrael.
Referring to the Patria?
Patria, right.
That was the haGuela.
The haGuela sank it, yeah. Bo'es shememshelis Britannia hechlito liyashiv es hapleitim b'makom acher, because these refugees who were on the ship were people who reached Palestine, but they didn't have visas, so the British took them all, rounded them up and said, we're going to send you to Mauritius, an island in the Indian Ocean. And that's it. They'll live over there. They'll survive the war. They'll live over there, right? So, not in Eretz Yisrael. Since this wasn't going to contribute to the Zionist goal of settling Eretz Yisrael, Shalakamas Medina Atzmais, having an independent state, they sacrificed the whole ship, with all the people who escaped the Holocaust, Anashim, V'nashim, V'taf, men, women, and children. They sank the ship on purpose and cruelly. They sank the ship. I just have a little...
241 Jews were murdered.
Yeah, I have a page about it here.
Plus 12 British police officers. Does he mention also the Baghdad synagogue bombings?
Don't think so. The Patria disaster was the sinking on November 25th, 1940, by the Jewish paramilitary organization haGuela of a French-built ocean liner. Patria killing 267 people and injuring 172.
It's from Wikipedia?
Yeah. At the time of the sinking, Patria was carrying about 1,800 Jewish refugees from Nazi-occupied Europe, whom the British authorities were deporting from Mandatory Palestine to Mauritius because they lacked entry permits. So they really could have killed 1,800 people if it would have sank with everybody on them. Unfortunately, some of them were able to get out. Zionist organizations opposed the deportation, and the underground paramilitary haGuela group planted a bomb intended to disable the ship to prevent it from leaving Haifa. So they'll say, okay, we didn't plan to kill the people, we just wanted to disable it. The haGuela claims to have miscalculated the effects of the explosion. The bomb blew the steel frame off one side, one full side of the ship, and the ship sank in less than 16 minutes, trapping hundreds in the hold. The British allowed the survivors to remain in Palestine on humanitarian grounds. Who was responsible and the true reason why Patria sank remained controversial mysteries until 1957. So they didn't even tell that they did it. Until 1957, when Munya Mardor, the person who planted the bomb, published a book about his experiences.
What's the book called? I forget. I think I saw the title.
Yeah, I don't know. So they didn't even admit to doing this until one of the people told that he did it. That's the way it is with them. Usually when something happens in the world, right, the Israeli government does not comment on who did it. Anyway.
Like the Baghdad synagogue bombings.
Okay, yeah, maybe. V'haloi gam b'milchemes kibush Sinai. Rebbe continues and says, even by the war of the Sinai campaign, 56, hichrizu v'hitziru. He says, these religious Zionists who say that the 6-day war was a Milchemes mitzvah or whatever, Milchemes hechrich, they said it back then too in 56. Hichrizu v'hitziru. They announced and they proclaimed hashkim v'herev, like every morning and every evening, shemilchama ha'haisa hechrechis, that the war was necessary. So the secular Zionists announced that it was necessary, and the religious Zionists who tag along, gam heim tzaku, they also cried out and said, Ru'u ki Hashem asa lanu nisim gedolim v'atzumim. Look at the great miracles that Hashem did for us. Shehamidu b'tzeil es kol anisim shalam b'nei Yisrael ad hayom hazeh, that they overshadowed all miracles that ever occurred to the Jewish people until now. That's what they said. V'ra'u Ma also, well, he says, Ru'u, the Rebbe says now, you, people reading my Sefer, Ru'u, see what happened. Ma also biyadam, what happened from all these miracles? What did we gain from them? Le'acher kama shvuos, a few weeks later, chalfu v'gazu anisim, the nisim all dropped away. V'hayu koloi hayu, it was as if they didn't happen. V'huchrechu lasegas, they had to retreat, mikol oisna v'koy meshakavshu, from all the places that they conquered in the war. Levad shenaflu karbanos lemeis v'ulay la'alafim. Besides the fact that hundreds and maybe thousands of Jews were killed in the war, and what did they do it for? For nothing, right? They didn't gain any land. They didn't change anything about the conflict. That was it. And still, the religious Zionists didn't stop lahashmiya v'liskaya b'chatzotzros nisim. They didn't stop proclaiming through the trumpets nisim. V'yoz b'milchemes kibush Sinai goli v'yadua shaloi haisla milchemes hatzala. Everybody knows that war didn't save any lives. Ki'im l'toyalis ga'avasam v'nitzchonim. It was just to show their pride and their victory. And despite this, gam oz gamru aleim is a halal. Even them, the Zionists, the religious Zionists, were saying halal and praising Hashem for nisim. V'yitzdiku es milchamtam, and they justified the war. They said it was a correct thing to do. Shenaf l'bar harbin nefashim Yisrael al loy davar. That many Jewish lives were lost for nothing. Achein mulumadim heim lahatois das hatzibur. They're experienced at changing the mind of the tzibur, confusing the tzibur. V'chol oil kuloi al yidei hashpa ha'atzuma. Through the powerful influence that they have, sheyesh lohem kamat al kol michtevei hoitim ba'olim, that they have almost all newspapers in the world under their influence. Kasher heim atzmam hoidu v'higidu. They themselves admit to it and they said it. Uv'koyach zeh heim misamin einei ha'olim. With this power of controlling the newspapers, they blind the eyes of the world, lahatzti kol ma'aseim, to justify everything they do. V'ha'olim shoisim batzama estivreim, and the world drinks their words thirstily. V'al kol gal v'gal nenim lahem b'roisham. Everything they say, they nod their heads. Umaskimim lahem, they agree to them. V'einayim lahem v'lo yiru ha'emes. They have eyes, but they can't see the truth. V'kach oila b'yadam lahatois es das akal, and that's how they succeed in confusing the minds of the people, the Jewish people. So they say by this war, the 6-day war, they say there was no other way except to fight the war. But it's all falsehood. They were really obligated to try other possibilities, other options. To do instead of attacking. Even other nations always try to avoid bloodshed if they can. Even though they do have disputes with their neighbors, right? There's plenty of countries around the world that have disputes with their neighbors. They're not so in a hurry to go out to war. They try other options first. But these Zionists are not like that. They just desire war. They have a desire for victory. And to go and rule over more land and more power. It makes them go against their own common sense. And they put at risk Jewish lives. The Heim Atzmam Hoidu V'loy Boishu, they themselves admitted without embarrassment in their own newspapers that because of the war in 67, the situation of Jews in other countries, in Arab countries, became much worse. That they caused this to happen by rushing into this war. And the Jews in other countries are now in danger.